Since the start of the NBA, centers have been the most dominant position in the league. If we look at the first full decade the NBA was around, the 1960s, you've got Wilt leading the league in scoring, you've got Bob Pettit up there, and somewhere down here you're going to have Bill Russell. This just shows that centers were really dominant. If you look at the 70s, you've got guys like Kareem, Elvin Hayes, Bob Lanier, Bob McAdoo, all up there for leading the league in scoring. And then even so in the 80s, it's not loading. Oh, here we go. You're going to have a lot more wing-oriented, where you got guys like Alex English, Dominique Wilkins up there. But even at the very top, you're going to see right there Moses Malone, one of the best centers of all time. And you've got Larry Bird. You've still got Kareem up there, but it was a lot more wing-oriented. But even down there, you see Robert Parrish, and it just shows that even in years that were considered like decades down for centers, you've still got dominant players. And now you look at the 1990s, probably the prime age for NBA big men. You've got Karl Malone, Shaq, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley. All six of those guys in the top 10 of points per game, and they were just dominating the league, being these big men. Like, you don't see that as much anymore, and I think this is really once NBA big men started to become more talented. Before the 90s and 2000s, I think a lot of the centers in the NBA were somewhat just dominating due to their size. NBA players have gotten bigger over the years, more talented, and that is shown with big men too. You look in the 2000s, you got Shaq, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Antoine Jameson, Dirk Nowitzki. You got so many great big men up here, and you're starting to see guys like Dirk and Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan with a bit more skill. Yet, when we get to the 2010s, you're going to notice that there is a bit of a fall off on the NBA big men. Looking at the 2010s, we obviously have the guys like Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony all leading the league. But you got Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins, LaMarcus Aldridge as maybe the only actual big men. I wouldn't consider Blake Griffin a big man, just my opinion. Those are the only guys up there, and if you look at their teams that they were on, none of them were really that successful, which is kind of the point of the video. This is the fall of NBA big men this year. You look around this time, and if you don't remember, teams were just like, yeah, we can throw PJ Tucker out on center, we can throw JaVale McGee out on center and be a successful team. So what happened in this 2010s decade that made NBA centers so much less valuable? If we look at the 2010s decade and the NBA champions in this decade, you see at the top, the first few years, you've got the Lakers, who had Pau Gasol. They beat the Celtics, who had Kevin Garnett. Pretty good year for big men. Dallas Mavericks, led by Dirk Nowitzki, they beat the Heat with Chris Bosh. That was another year where a big man won the NBA. The finals, not the NBA, but then you have the Heat, back-to-back years winning, and they had Chris Bosh, good big men. 2014, Spurs winning, another good big man with Tim Duncan. And then you look here, this is the start. The Golden State Warriors beat the Cavs. Golden State Warriors were probably going out there with Andrew Bogut at this point. Maybe JaVale McGee, but it doesn't matter. Neither of them were good centers, and it's a weird that there's so much of a drop-off where you have Tim Duncan, Chris Bosh, Dirk Nowitzki, and then boom. And these teams were really the ones to eliminate centers. These late 2010s Warriors teams that were so dominant, one of the best records, or the best record of all time. And you look at the teams that followed their footsteps, like the Rockets, they ended up putting PJ Tucker and Robert Covington at center. And teams just went away from big men due to the success and dominance of this Warriors team that let guards and wings just function around the three-point line and do their thing. And yeah, teams just really wanted to follow in their footsteps. A lot of people, including myself, thought that this was the end of NBA big men. They were getting considered to be like the running backs of the NBA, where you can just throw out whoever and they'll probably be successful, because, let's be real, having size in basketball does make it easier to play. So if you can throw out just anyone who can be big, they're going to be successful with good players around them. But if we look at the 2020s, you got the Lakers, Anthony Davis. You got the Bucks, Giannis. The Warriors are the exception here. Then you have the Nuggets with Jokic leading their team. I mean, dominant player, Jokic. And then this year you have the Celtics, and while they weren't necessarily led by a big man, they had a really good one in Kristaps Porzingis. And when I look at the 2020s so far of the NBA, you've got Joel Embiid, you've got Giannis, you've got Jokic, all winning MVPs around the 2020 mark. You've got Anthony Davis down here, who was a champion. You've got Domantas Sabonis. who are all really good players. And I think this is the rise of the centers coming back to the NBA. You obviously just had Wemby drafted #1, generational talent, right? Just a few years ago. You had Alex Sarr #2 this year. I think we're starting to see NBA centers, or just big men in general, get back on the course they were on to be these dominant players. And I think it took a little longer for them to adapt to the current NBA, because it used to be where you had Shaq, where he was just a physical presence, where he could just dominate with his size. And now NBA centers and just big men in general are having to develop more skills. And I think for them, it took them longer to adapt. You look at guards, they've always had to be skilled. Wings as well. Centers, you could just get away with having size. And now you're seeing NBA big men start to develop skills like Jokic and Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis, where they can handle the ball. You can get them on the post. You can get them on the three-point line and hit shots. So that is the rise, fall, and rise of centers in the NBA. There was a steady rise between the 1960s up to the 2000s. And then the 2010s was the decline, where you started to see all the winning teams really not use centers and just throw out whoever. And then we're starting to see the rise again in the 2020s. And I think you look at Wemby, and he's going to be almost... actually, I'd say Jokic is probably the face of centers in the NBA right now, but Wemby is probably going to be that soon. And I think when we look back in a few years, we're going to look at Wemby and see him as the guy that brought NBA centers back to dominance. So let me know what y'all thought. Let me know your thoughts on NBA centers as a whole, their rise, their fall. Let me know anything that you thought of the video. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. See you next time.